Boatworks Today is sponsored by Total Boat and Alexseal Yacht Coatings, as well as supported by the generosity from the beautiful folks over on Patreon. Thank you so much.
All right. So welcome back to the shop, everybody. Hope you're all doing well. My name is Andy with Boatworks Today, and this week I want to try something a little bit different. Now, just as a quick backstory, 2 or 3 weeks ago when I was over in Charleston doing some work with the folks over at Alexseal, one of the things that we did while I was there was I got together with Miguel and Brian, and we kind of sat around and had a little bit of a round table discussion, kind of going over some of the frequently asked questions and frequent issues that some folks run into when they're painting their boats or their campers or whatever it may happen to be. So in total, we ended up I thought I recorded about an hour and a half long of conversation. Now, unfortunately, again, at that time, I'm still trying to learn this new audio and video gear. Evidently, there's a little built-in thing that limits your recording time to 39 minutes. I was not aware of that. I wish I would have known. So out of that hour and a half long conversation, I got 29 minutes and 59 seconds. So a lot of it unfortunately got lost, but it is what it is. There's nothing I can do about it except learn from it and make sure I don't screw it up next time. Now, just a quick little backstory. So the two guys that I was talking with, Brian and Miguel. Now Brian, that's this guy here. He's been in this painting industry for, I think he said almost 40 years now. He's basically been painting since he was 17. Worked on everything from smaller boats all the way up to, I think the largest project he said that he painted was 160 foot boat. Big ass boat. So he's been doing this a long time, and he's also one of the techs. Like if you were to call in to Alexseal with questions or whatever, if you're calling from like the Florida area or anywhere on the East Coast, most likely you're going to end up talking to one of these two guys. Now Miguel, on the other hand, his background is, from what I understand, is a lot like mine. Back in the day, he had his own business. He did marine repair. And I don't know. I'm not sure if he focused strictly on painting, but he a small business owner, and in a lot of ways our paths were pretty parallel. So these two guys have either seen it, done it several times over. So these are good folks to be talking with if you have any questions. So getting back to the conversation, it was just kind of interesting to hear how the three of us having different takes on certain things. Now, after that conversation was done, we were all kind of talking, and we said, that was actually a lot of fun. It might be kind of interesting, say like maybe once a month, for us to get together and do an actual live stream on, YouTube, or maybe just keep it strictly over on Patreon or whatever. But to like once a month get together, do a live stream and ask for some questions and any questions or issues that you may be running into. Ask for that ahead of time. And then, we'll go ahead and we'll address everything, that we got live online. I don't know if there would be any kind of interest like that, but we all, again, we had a lot of fun talking. We thought, well, what the hell, we'll give it a shot. So that's what this video is really all about. It's just a little bit of a snippet of the 29 minutes and 59 seconds that I was able to record. Now, there's a lot other that I'm not including in this video, and maybe I'll kind of pepper these in every once in a while in the weeks to come if there's some interest in this. But regardless, if this is something that you find kind of interesting, let me know down in the comments below. If it's not something that you're really getting fired up about, that's fine. Fair enough. Anybody that wants to leave a comment saying get back to working on boats, it's coming. It's in the works. It's just certain things need to happen before that gets started back up. But anyways, enough jibber jabber. Let's get into the video. Next one. Okay, so someone calls in. They say, I'm trying to get this material rolled out. I'm having a hard time with it actually flowing out. What kind of things do you typically suggest to them to try in order to try and figure out where things are kind of coming short as far as why the paint's not flowing out the way that it should?
First thing I'm going to ask them is their mix ratio.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to say a good 80% of the time they're not putting enough reducer in it.
Okay.
They're under reducing it, which is causing it. The other thing is, try to the best you can. And I know a lot of times you're working outside rolling these boats. try to, the best you can, to work the sun. Sometimes you're working on the sunny side all the time, whereas at some point there's a shady side and a sunny side. Can't always be done that way, but those are questions I typically ask. Also, wind. If the wind is blowing, 15, 20 miles an hour, that paint is the reducer will evaporate a little bit quicker. It'll also skim your paint over on the top, which could cause some orange peel issues as well. So some of it's environmental things and some of it's mix ratio. So you got to figure out, first of all, let's get the mix ratio right, and then what kind of environmental conditions do you have?
And so someone goes in. Another thing to kind of keep in mind is when you're planning this out. Let's just say that one side of the boat is going to be in the sun, the other side is going to be in the shade initially, but in the sun later. So when you're planning this out, it'd be best to try and start on the sunny side early before the sun has really had a chance to bake it. Get that part knocked out.
True.
And then work your way over to the shady side, because then by then, depending on how long it's going to take, the sun may be starting to come around, but at least the surface is going to be still on the cooler side.
Earlier times in the morning are usually really good because it's cooler, the wind hasn't picked up. So those are typically good times of day to do it. There's also not the hubbub of the day that's kicking up a bunch of dust.
People driving around in and out of the marinas, kicking up dirt, gravel.
But if the person's still struggling and they've got all those components right, it can come down to what technique they're using, So what I like to do is have them get 5 panels, stick them on a vertical, mix up a little bit of paint, roll out the first panel exactly the way they think they have to. They wait about half an hour to see what it's going to do. And if it's looking great, you can go on. If it's not, now you can go on to, you've got 2 panels on either side. You paint the one on the left a little bit lighter, the one on the right a little bit heavier. Then you'd wait and you'd watch what would happen for that. If the heavier one happens to flow out a lot nicer, no runs, then the next 2 panels are left. You can go heavier and even heavier still. And see, and now you've got a feel for exactly how much paint to put on. So work with it that way.
And a lot of that application, as far as film thickness, a lot of that comes down to the type of roller you're using. Some rollers, and I just kind of talked about this here a week or so ago. Some rollers, will load up a lot of paint and then they unload it very quickly.
Yeah.
Some, unload that material in a much more consistent pattern, so you're able to get a more uniform coating over an area. So when we're talking about rollers, do you think that there's a difference in how thick the film thickness between like a foam roller versus like a short hair mohair roller?
I'm not really too concerned with that, because what I would do is I would first, when I'm putting down the paint, I'm going to stretch out the paint to where and get it spread out to a certain distance, and then I would go back and back roll that gently. And then the next thing is when you have starting the next section, you're going to leave instead of joining straight up into that wet edge, leave a dry area and start working. That way, if you have too much paint on your roller, you can move it away and then come back into that wet edge later. And that way you're not loading up that wet edge and trying to stretch out the paints over existing paint.
That goes back to technique sometimes.
Yeah.
What is the technique? If you start out either with the panels like Miguel said, or maybe, today, what we're going to try to do is just the transom of the boat, because it's a small area. If you make a mistake, it's the easy area to sand and redo. And it's going to be vertical, so you can go on that transom of that boat and you can roll out and get your technique down on a small area without worrying about 20 feet of boat to go down the side of, or 30 feet or 40 feet, whatever size that boat is. You're not worried about going down that whole side and getting that it can get in your head a little bit that, oh my God, I got this big area to do, and it's just not.
So the general technique is, just to kind of summarize this, let's just say you do a 2-foot wide strip. You have to go back and reload your roller. Rather than starting right where you left off, you skip over a foot, make your initial roll down. So now you've got room on to the left and to the right where you can kind of work that material and kind of spread it out, and then eventually blend it into what
I would
was
leave
your
too
wet
big
edge.
an area between.
About 6 inches.
Yeah,
I usually recommend about a roller's width.
Yeah,
that's
perfect. Yeah. Also, I like to tell a lot of the DIY guys not to stress out too much, like on their first 2 coats, because typically by the second coat, there might be a little blemish here or there, even if you do get it perfect. So I tell them, go ahead, roll out the first 2 coats. Let's say the first coat comes out a little bumpy. Just go ahead, roll out that second coat, because you're going to sand that anyway. And so then when they get to the third coat, then it's game on.
So, kind of going off of that then, as far as trying to figure out the process, because a lot of times when people are doing this, they're not strictly doing just one small area. They're either doing the entire hull or they're redoing, the interior, like the decks and their non-skid and that kind of thing. I know a lot of questions, or a lot of people have questions as far as where do I start and how do I figure out the process? Like, let's just say you're doing a console. Do I start at the top of the console and work my way down? Or do I start at one side, work all 4 sides, and then work my way up to the top? And hopefully that I'm still able to maintain a wet edge, so that everything blends in. Tell me if you agree with this, but what I've always suggested was that, people, use your primer coats as like your test runs for figuring out the process, because primer coats are very forgiving on the application, but it allows you to be able to figure out what areas are going to take longer to work than others.
and that is a great theory, and I tell the people the same thing. Whether you're putting on primer or you're putting on top coat, do it the same way.
Right.
Because now you're consistent, and that primer coat, you're correct on a console, because each console or each boat's going to have its own little things that
There's a lot of detail on consoles.
Right. That may present a challenge.
Cesar, I'm talking to you.
and in a different spot, So if you're thinking about it as you put your primer on and looking at those things, so that when you comes time to put your top coat on, you've
got that process figured out.
You've got that process, and you've figured out where the challenges are within that scope of that project. So you can.
The process is figured out. Now you can just focus on the paint.
Right. They're not as much of a challenge anymore, and you can overcome them easily.
Also, something to think about, like when you're doing especially larger paint applications, is having a starting point and an ending point. So you really want to be managing one wet edge per person painting. Because if you're having to run from one side to the other side to keep that wet edge going, you're going to go nuts, right? I mean, you could probably pull it off, but you can have situations where you can end up with like 3 wet edges going. So plan a start and a stop point. Yeah.
So what I've always just kind of referred to those as like break points.
Yeah.
So like for me, what I've always, suggested was that a break point is best on a tight radius, say like on the corner of the transom or at the bow of the stem of the bow.
Yeah.
So that way, I mean, those are the reason that those are good areas is because they're inconspicuous. And it's because it's on a radius, you can come in and blend it. And if it doesn't blend 100% perfect, it's not going to jump out at you versus being in the middle of the hull or middle of the transom.
Yeah, every boat and everything, it's got its natural breaking points.
Right.
Some
use the
don't.
terminology.
Some areas don't.
For the most part, you can figure those out.
Yeah.
And where they don't have breaking points, sometimes you're going around a door or a window or something where there's only like above a door, there's only like 2 or 3 inches above that door, and you're saying, well, I got to get that around there, but at the same time, use that door as a breaking point. It's 2 or 3 inches. If you got to come in there and wet sand and buff a little bit,
it's an inconspicuous area.
It's an inconspicuous
Piece of
area,
hardware.
and it's a small area. Or you can go, above or below a window that's only like, a small little area above it and a smaller area below the window, and use those as breaking points to a degree. Yeah, you got to come back and wet sand and buff those areas, but if you use something that's not in that area and it's 6 feet tall, now you got to wet sand and buff a 6 foot area versus
A small, yeah.
small area. So you just have to look at it. And I like your theory of looking at the primer. I've told people that when you're putting a primer on there, think about that you're putting a top coat on there.
Right.
Also, something to think about, if you're gonna put like a breaking point at like a little edge like that, don't tape it. Just roll into it so that you have a soft edge, and you can always like sand into that and buff that out a little easier.
Okay. Now, different topic. Recoat times. How far can you cheat this material and still making sure you're not going to be trapping solvent and getting solvent pop, with the primer and the paint?
Okay, so when
When we're talking about rolling.
There's a lot of thought that you have to think about with that. All right. One is that, we mentioned whether you could get orange peel if the wind's blowing 15 or 20 miles an hour, and it's skimming your paint over on the top. So is it 90 degrees with a breeze, low humidity? Is it 90 degrees, high humidity? Is it 60 degrees? So recoat time is going to vary on that. Also, we're talking about rolling, so we're using a slower evaporating solvent. So your environment is going to play a big part in that recoat time. Also, there is accelerators that can accelerate to a degree, but it's more accelerating the curing time than it is the flash time. And that's kind of what we're talking about as far as recoat is the flash time.
Yeah.
And what product and what is the film thickness? Because film thickness is going to vary your recoat time depending on temperature.
So the biggest thing when people are looking through the TDS, the TDS, the minimum and maximum recoat times that are spec'd out there, they break it down by temperature and all that stuff.
Correct.
But those recoat times are specific for spraying and not necessarily rolling. Rolling, it has different minimum recoat times.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So
here's the distinction. So when you're spraying, you're not mechanically touching that surface, right? So, when you're spraying, you could say with 442 wait an hour, at 80 degrees, and it's ready to be recoated, right?
and spray is also using a much faster evaporating reducer.
Yeah, and there's not you're still using the R5015 or the R4042.
Even if it's the same reducer, what he's talking about mechanically, it's like when you're spraying, you're this far away from it. You're not touching that surface.
Right.
When you're rolling, you're touching that surface. So if you go over it too soon, the coat that you're putting on can eat into the coat that you already have on and loosen it
and now
up.
you're rubbing against
And now
it.
you're because you're actually rubbing against it. So, and you always got to think about not wanting to trap solvents, because trapping solvents can
Solvent pop.
cause pinholing.
Yeah.
Okay. Generally, like spraying, you can go over 442 finish primer in an hour to an hour and a half at, a 80-degree temperature. If you're rolling it, you might want to consider to increasing that time in those same environmental conditions, because you're mechanically touching it. So you can go out there. It might be 3 hours.
Okay. So what I was going to say,
it's environmental.
As a safe bet, like if we just wanted to play it as safe as could possibly be, recoats anywhere between 12 and 24 hours.
For the 442.
From the previous coat.
From the previous coat.
As well as for the paint.
No, the paint's 6 hours to 24 hours.
Okay, so you can go down to 6 on the paint.
Depending on the temperature.
Okay.
Yeah.
Environmental.
That's the temperature is a big factor there.
Temperature, environmental conditions are a big factor in recoat time.
But to play it safe, you could just say as a general rule, 12 to 24 for both materials. Just not to say that you couldn't do it sooner.
Perfect conditions. Perfect. Everything perfect. Yes.
Okay.
Now, there are those people out there that I've seen them do it. They've recoated it with a roller in an hour and a half, 2 hours, and haven't had problem. But to be on the safe side, let's stay on the safe side. We're going to do this perfect.
Actually, with 442,
Then you want to go to that 6 hour window because you're mechanically touching again. Now, like I said, there are a lot of people out there go over top of it. You know, they put it on 2 hours later, put another coat, 2 hours later, put another coat on there. And it has, you know,
They haven't had any issues.
they haven't had any issues.
Okay.
But
So it like, how would you test the surface and see if it's ready?
so
for rolling, I don't think there's really a way to say that this is ready.
that's why there's an extended time up to
Because-
6 hours.
Okay.
You can go touch it and the paint, like spraying, you can go touch it, paint don't come back on your finger. It's pretty much ready. Well, when you're rolling, you go touch it with your finger and you go, okay, it's ready. And it's an hour later and you start rolling and you start,
Lifting it.
because you're mechanically rubbing against it.
And you reintroduce
And
fresh solvent into
Yeah.
that.
Talking fresh solvent back into it. So there's not a tried and true method of
Okay. So when in doubt, wait it out.
wait it out.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Next question. 2-part material over top of 1. Yes or no?
Typically, no. No.
Typically, no. I've seen it where you can put it over it and it goes on, it looks great, and 6 months later it's peeling the entire thing, including the coat that was put on, that was on there, the one part is coming off with it
In sheets.
in sheets. So I always say no, because it's either gonna lift it off of there, like put paint stripper on there, or you may or may not have paint on your boat 6 months from now.
So it's going to fail. It's just a matter of whether it's now or later. Okay. So now, and on that note, I think I'm going to button this one up just so it doesn't run too long. So now, like I said in the beginning of the video, this is just kind of a trial run, kind of testing the waters to see if there's any interest in this kind of a format. Let me know down in the comments below. And also, if you learned something from the conversation, let me know down in the comments. And if you did, thumbs up would be awesome. If you're not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you get notified whenever new content comes out. That would be appreciated. Thank you very much in advance. Any questions, comments about this or anything going forward, let me know down in the comments below and I'll do my best to follow up with you. And as always, I want to thank you for your time. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend. And I'm out of breath. And I'll see you in the next video.
This has been a Boatworks Today production.